皆さん、こんにちは。日本の不動産の冒険をご覧いただきありがとうございます。Thank you for joining me on this week's My Adventures in Japanese Real Estate. And for this episode, I want to do sort of the part two of where to live in Japan. This time, I'm going to talk about not so much regions, but areas and talk about, what might make your decision for where you want to live in Japan based on the needs that you might have. So after the intro, we'll get into it. Hi everybody, I'm Paul Durant and welcome to My Adventures in Japanese Real Estate. As you know, last week I talked about where in Japan to live, and I talked a little bit about Tokyo at the beginning of the discussion because that's where most people think of when they think of Japan, and maybe that's what you're thinking about now. Maybe Tokyo would be a good place to live, and well, for a lot of people, I think it is. Jobs are plentiful there, much more plentiful than other parts of Japan. Probably higher level of opportunities depending on what you're looking to go into. So there can be a lot of pluses. You don't have to have a car, you can live in an urban, exciting environment, etc. So if that's what you're looking for, then Tokyo may fit the bill, but there may be some other cities in Japan that also fit the bill and may even be a little bit more suitable for you. So go back to last week's episode and watch some of that, and we'll get into that in a little bit more detail as we go. But this time I want to talk about some of the criteria that you might decide where you want to live. And of course, one of the things that I think a lot of people come up with first is just safety. Japan is a safe country. You've heard this. It's definitely true. However, you do have to be aware of your safety even in Japan. Now, it's true that if you're going to live in Tokyo, it's a lot safer city than a lot of the other cities in the world, perhaps, but the countryside of Japan is obviously going to be a lot safer than the cities. And by safe, maybe the type of things that you might encounter might be different. For example, there are home invasion robberies, and there are also robberies when you're not home, I guess, but it's still home invasion. That can be a big thing, and that's not zero in Japan. Those are going to happen certainly in the cities. People aren't watching out for each other very much, but in the countryside, it's very, very rare because people are very aware of their neighbors, aware of their surroundings, etc. So those break-ins, they do happen in the cities. You want to be definitely aware of that. Also, very touristy areas will have their share of break-ins, petty crimes, that sort of thing. So, that may be something that you want to avoid. Tourism areas, well, of course, the tourists might do things. Also, the locals might do things because they can hide it. It just depends. I mean, it's not really looking to blame anybody, but the question is, where can you feel safe and what does safe mean to you? So Japan is a very safe country overall, but there are certainly areas that are safer than others. And certainly if you're moving into a small village, your safety is very, very close to being guaranteed. So beyond that, perhaps schools might be an issue. Now, of course, a lot of the times I'm speaking mostly to foreigners who are moving into Japan. And so you might have kids, you might be worried about the schools, you might be worried about the language. It's a big issue. Now, it also depends on how old your kids are. If your kids are in kindergarten or first grade, maybe they can acclimate themselves into a Japanese public school very easily. If they're higher grades, it might be more difficult. And so you'll want to pay attention to where the schools have a system in place where they can take kids that don't speak Japanese, for example, or kids who are from foreign places. Certain villages and even towns and certainly cities in Japan are better at this than others because they have more experience dealing with foreigners coming into the country. And so you can find schools, even in small towns and villages in Japan, in certain areas, that provide Japanese as a second language and things like that. But this is obviously going to be something that is a concern. The Japanese school system is pretty standardized. However, urban schools have more of a connection. They have more of a network. The curriculum tends to be better taught for whatever reason. Of course, there are inner city schools, especially when you're getting into high school. You can definitely find some schools where there are some rough kids and some things that you may not want to get into yourself or get your kids into. So you definitely want to pay attention to what types of schools are nearby, what types of schools you can attend. If you're looking at international schools, that's going to limit you substantially to probably some of the larger cities in Japan. Even medium-sized cities rarely will have an international school that goes all the way through. Sometimes they'll have elementary schools or even up to junior high, but they won't go all the way up to high school. So that's something that you want to look into or consider when you're looking for schools. Is there a school nearby? Now, of course, if you want to live in a small town that's, within an hour's distance of an international school in a city, well, that may be doable, especially in high school. And maybe international school is less important for elementary school kids or junior high school kids. It depends on your perspective. But school can be something to definitely sway your decision one way or another. So looking into the schools that are available is important. Also, another thing is a lot of times small towns in Japan don't even have high schools. So even the Japanese high school kids will have to go to another town to go to high school. So and frankly, sometimes even the junior highs are rare. So this is also something to look into. Probably if you're looking for the best international schools, certainly the big three cities, Tokyo, Yokohama area, Nagoya, or Osaka is going to provide you by far the best opportunities for really high quality international schools. But there are other ones that are going to be good quality, perhaps a bit expensive in other parts of the country as well. Another thing that might concern you is healthcare, maybe for your kids or maybe for yourself. Now, this is something to be aware of, especially if you're looking into a small town or a community that is a bit remote, because a lot of times doctor accessibility can be tough. And this is something that's difficult for the Japanese as they get older, because they want to be closer to healthcare facilities, but the healthcare facilities are in the city or in maybe even larger towns, so that means that they've got to move away from their small villages. This happens very often, but healthcare is definitely something that is going to be better in the cities, and it's going to get a little bit more challenging as you get more and more into the smaller towns. And finally, of course, in the very, very small villages, there may not be a doctor, or there may not be a hospital, or there may not be a ward for certain types of things. For example, in my area of Nagano, there is a hospital within 30 minutes of my house. Well, that's pretty good for Nagano, but they have no maternity ward. So how far do you have to go if you are expecting? You have to go an hour away. If you're a foreigner moving into Japan, you might be concerned about where the nearest immigration center is, because you're going to have to deal with visas and paperwork, etc. It's not a big deal, but it is something that you'll need to be aware of, and it's something that's going to come up, fairly often during your stay in Japan. So, where are the immigration centers? Well, where you'd expect. So, of course, Tokyo, Nagoya, Osaka, those are the big areas. However, a lot of the probably most of the medium-sized cities in Japan will have sort of branch immigration offices. They're not going to process the paperwork in those offices. So you're going to submit paperwork there. You're probably going to go back there and get your visas, etc. But you're not going to actually deal with anybody dealing with the paperwork in those branch offices. That's all going to be sent off to one of the big offices, Tokyo, Nagoya, Osaka, etc., to be processed. So that's going to slow down the process time a little bit. And if that's an issue, you may have to go to one of those big centers. However, there's a plus side too, which is you don't wait as long in line. And if you don't have to worry about the processing time, which often you don't, it's often not a big deal, then it's great to go to the medium-sized cities, just get your paperwork done, pass it in, and wait for the results. So access to immigration centers could be an issue. Of course, shopping is an issue. A lot of the small villages don't even have convenience stores. They certainly don't have supermarkets. There could be a supermarket 30 minutes away or something like that. Department stores could be an hour away. There is a tendency for fewer stores like that in the rural areas of Japan, and it can be quite a drive sometimes, or quite a commute, maybe on train, to get to the nearest store. So that's definitely something to be concerned about. Of course, in the cities, supermarkets, no problem. Convenience stores are practically on every corner. It seems very convenient, but even in certain neighborhoods, especially the older neighborhoods, it can be harder to find a convenience store. It can be harder to find a supermarket, and it can be harder to get into those shopping areas. You might find a little mom and pop shop, but you may not find a 7-Eleven really close by, even in the cities if you're looking at the older areas. So you definitely want to pay attention to your shopping needs. It's less of an issue now. Of course, you can do online shopping, but certain things you just want to buy for real. And maybe that's most of the things you buy. So shopping has to be an issue when you decide on a place. So cities tend to be more convenient, of course. They have trains. They have a much better transportation system. They also have a lot of cars, and they have a lot of crowded, congested roads, etc. So that's relatively inconvenient. The countryside tends to not have as many trains. Pretty much everybody has a car. The roads are, little 2-lane roads that go around, and people drive fairly slow on those roads. So you need to be aware of that aspect of convenience. Maybe you are a few kilometers away, but that few kilometers away from a convenience store could be really fast or pretty slow, depending on if you get behind somebody slow driving down the street or something like that. So it's something to be aware of. The trains that are in the countryside tend to be very inconvenient schedule-wise. Sometimes they come only once an hour. Sometimes they come literally once an hour and a half or something like that. The buses can be really like once a day or twice a day in really extreme cases, or no bus at all. So there can be places out there where there's absolutely no access except for a car. And so you do need to be aware of that. Of course, the cities all have strong public transit, but that transit might end at city limits. And then it doesn't really extend very, very well into the suburbs. That's very common in Japan. So, there'll be some that will go into the suburbs, but that really, really nice connection of trains and buses, etc. Once you go outside the city limits, it kind of disappears. The speed limits also on the roads. If you've driven in Japan, the speed limits tend to be low. The roads are very narrow. City roads are very, very narrow, and there's houses, really bucked up against on either side of them. Country roads, well, maybe it's a little bit less tight, but those roads are also still really narrow. In fact, there are some roads in the cities and countryside that you can only drive the K car, or the little mini cars in. A full-size car won't even fit on that road. So you have to be aware of that. Also, in the country, owning a car tends to be pretty cheap. Having a parking space, usually free. It's no problem. You have to have proof of a parking place when you buy a car in Japan. So that's going to be a concern. In the cities, finding a parking place can be very tough, can be very expensive, and you may not even be able to park near your place at all. But you've got to rent the place in order to buy the car. You can't buy a car without proof of a place to park, especially in the city. So be aware of that. So the car can be very, very expensive if you decide to actually have a car in the city. If cars are important, it's probably a good idea to stay more in the suburbs or even in the exurbs a little bit, I think. What do you look for in a job? That's really tough to say. We could do a whole video, we could do probably 10 videos about that. Of course, the way that most people come here is to become an English teacher or a teacher of whatever language. It's not an ideal job by any means. Some people love it, some people hate it. The job itself is probably to love. I mean, you have great students, you have great opportunities to express yourself, to make connections, to talk to people, etc. You're also enriching people's lives. So that job is a fantastic job. However, unfortunately, not every company that provides that job is ideal. You really want to do some research about the company that you're working with, the salaries, etc., the history of the company before you jump into an English teaching job. The other possibility is, of course, there are lower skill jobs, factory workers and that sort of thing available. Of course, they're going to be lower salary etc. They are out there. There are kind of more opportunities for less skilled laborers in Japan, but it can be very tough to get a visa if you're going to take that kind of job. So the best way to probably get a visa, especially to start off, is just to be an English teacher or a teacher of whatever language. Also, self-employed business visas and that sort of thing. That's obviously going to be something that we could do several videos about as well, but that's another way to get into Japan. Self-employed could mean that you're focusing on a countryside audience, or it could mean that you need a city audience. Another consideration in Japan is the weather. So you have to remember quite simply that Hokkaido is very cold in winter with a lot of snow. Same with northern Japan up to like around Nagano. The western part of Japan all the way around to Fukui tend to be very snowy areas. Lots and lots of snow. Some of the most snow in the world falls in these areas. Not that cold, not cold like Hokkaido, but still obviously not warm because there's a lot of snow. So that snow is an issue. On the Pacific side, Tokyo on down, and even really above Tokyo, you don't get very much snow, a lot more rain. The temperatures are warmer. The winters tend to be a bit dreary and rainy a lot, but you can have beautiful days obviously in the winter too. But they're a lot easier to get around. You don't have to have a four-wheel drive car. You don't have to have snow tires for the most part and that sort of thing. So if you're on the Pacific side, the weather is generally gentler. And then if you move further south, you keep going further south and further west as the island goes, you get into warmer and warmer climates. And so by the time you're down in, say, Hiroshima or someplace like that, you'll never see snow. It'll basically never snow down there. You'll see snow on the mountains, and that's about it. But the summers will be hot. So you have to think about what's important for you weather-wise, but you can practically find every type of weather. I mean, one of the things that Japan prides itself on is its 4 seasons, and yes, it definitely does have 4 seasons. The one exception may be Okinawa, but Okinawa is beautiful year-round, so it doesn't really matter. I think that the last thing to sort of keep in mind that I'd like to mention, and I'll probably do a whole episode on this too, is just the village life. You really got to commit yourself to a village. If you come into a village, there's a lot of expectation. I've talked about it in other videos. The community groups, the neighborhood groups, the expectations, you have to chip in, you have to join. There's a lot of things that you do. Japan is a community society. It's a collective society. It's a group society. Things work because the group works together to do it. And that is very much a way of thinking in the villages and smaller communities. So keep that in mind. It can be strange feeling, I think, sometimes, and it can be a little bit even invasive sometimes, but it's of course not intended. So this is just the way it operates, the way to integrate into society. So you have to be aware of that. You have to be ready for it. You have to know what's coming your way. It's a strong insider-outsider culture. So you can be an insider, but if you're not an insider, it can be very difficult to be an outsider. So you want to make sure that you're able to connect with your neighbors and that sort of thing. And that just stems to everything, the famous stories about garbage collection and the Toban system, where the neighbors will take turns at being sort of the neighbor representative, etc., of the community and this sort of thing. There can be some distrust towards foreigners that you'll have to deal with too. So those are all kinds of issues that may come up. We'll get into a lot more of these in detail, but I wanted to once again give an overview of these sorts of things so that they can be on your radar when you're thinking about the place to buy in Japan. So please remember, if you are interested in buying a house, let me know. I have started a buyer's consultancy. I'm working with a real estate agent, so we can actually operate more or less like a buyer's agent for you. Not just doing proxy buyer activities, but literally going in and finding houses, finding things that are not listed on real estate agents' websites, etc. We can do a lot of this kind of thing. And we can help you through the process of buying the house, and we can also alert you as to what might be good ideas, what might not be such good ideas as you buy your house. So reach out to me. You can leave a message in the comments. Love to hear any comments that anybody has. Of course, you can email me or go to my website, hakuba365.com, and fill out the form there about buying an IKEA and let me know what you're looking for in an IKEA. But until then, I hope you're enjoying the videos, and I look forward to seeing you again next week. Mata raishū ne.